Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's Dr. Jones again, and I'm talking to my middle school students. Now, in past weeks, we've been talking about non-living entities, things that are abiotic, not alive. But today, we're going to be talking about living entities by going over the characteristics of life. Now, when we look at living things, not all things that have characteristics that resemble life are alive. Here's what I'm saying. There are some things that may have organization, that may require energy, but are still not considered to be living entities or living things. If you look at this list, all living things possess all 7 of these characteristics, and we're going to go over them one at a time today. So let's start with the first one, organization. Now, when we're talking about organization, we're talking about the fact that all living things are composed of cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life. If you are smaller than a cell, technically, you're not alive. So, here's what I mean. Let's look at these different entities, okay? Take a moment and tell me which ones are alive, biotic, and which ones are not alive, abiotic. Now, let's start with the ones that are very easy. A leopard. Everybody knows a leopard is alive. These are pebbles. Everyone knows that pebbles are not alive. But let's talk about these others. This is a fern. All plants are living things because no matter what type of plant it is, they all are composed of cells. If we look at this is an earthworm. Earthworms also are living things because they're composed of cells. Now, this is an amoeba. An amoeba technically is an organism that is just one cell big. But because it has one cell, it's still considered to be a living thing. Now, this is a virus. Viral particles are actually smaller than cells. And viral particles only share some of the characteristics of living things, not all. So a virus would not be considered a living thing. A virus is abiotic. Next, adaptation. Now, the thing about adaptation is that it's not being accustomed to an environment. For example, if it's cold outside, I'll put on a coat. I didn't adapt to the cold, I just compensated for it. However, adaptation is when an organism, over time, is able to survive in an environment that has changed over time. So here's the question. Why don't individuals adapt to their environment? Here's why. As I said, adaptation is a change in the environment. Environmental changes take a long time to occur. If you think about it, you just don't go from grass to a small tree to a very large oak in a matter of days. It takes years. And if you think about organisms, you, in the lifespan of a great oak, would have multiple generations of giraffe. So you may say, well then, how did their necks get this height? Well, as you know, when the environment changes, certain animals can survive because they're made or they are designed for that change, and other animals won't survive because they're not made or designed for that change. Those that are not able to survive die off. Those that are reproduce and their offspring share the same characteristics. So in this case, over time, you will find that giraffes with longer necks tended to live, which means they will pass those genes on to their offspring. Okay? Response to environment. Now, here's the thing. Living things will make a physical change either in place or in the chemistry based on the environmental change. I'll make it even clearer. If you take your hand and put it on a hot stove, you will pull it back without even trying because That's your body's reaction to the fact that you're burning your hand. You'll find that there are more subtle ways of doing this. I'll give you an example. If you look at a plant, plants always turn in the direction of light. As long as you have a living plant, it will always face the light. However, if you have a dead plant, you can put in all the sunlight you want to. It will not grow because it is no longer a living entity. Okay? Regulation. Now, when we're talking about regulation, we're not talking about control as much as being able to maintain. Here's what I mean. If you look at the human body, if you become too hot, what do you do to try to cool off? You sweat. If you're too cold, what do you do to try to create some kind of heat? You'll shiver. These are types of responses to the environment that allow you to regulate your temperature. When an organism dies, or if an organism or an entity cannot make a change internally to compensate for the external change, it is not a living thing. Now, I know some of you are thinking about like reptiles. For example, they don't sweat, but they will change their location. One reason why alligators sun is because they need the heat to help them digest their food. One reason that bears hibernate is because without the amount of food available, they can't maintain their body systems. So there's a lot of ways organisms, living organisms, compensate for regulating or homeostasis the system. Okay? Next, energy processing. There's two main types of energy processing reactions or mechanisms in living things. You will either go through photosynthesis, where you use light to create energy in the form of like sugars, or you'll go through cellular respiration, where you take a sugar and convert that into something called an ATP. Think of ATP like gas for a car. It allows it to go. The more ATPs you have, the more energy you have, which is one reason why if you're an athlete, the day before a game, you definitely want a carb load. That way you'll have enough energy to sustain you throughout the tournament or the game. Now, batteries generate their energy, but here's the key. Living things must get their energy from the environment. A battery makes its energy because of a chemical reaction that occurs inside a battery. However, if the lion does not eat its prey, it will die. It will not get the energy that it needs. Where does the prey get the energy from? The plant. Where do the plants get the energy from? The sun. So you see how this works? Growth and development. Now, here's the thing about growth and development. Everybody can understand growth as getting bigger, but growth also means that you're getting more number or increasing in number. Development deals with going from like an organism that is very simple or in its childlike state to an organism that is larger, adult-like state. So if we're looking at this, these bacteria are growing. But if you look at a puppy compared to an adult dog, there is some development that occurs. It just doesn't get larger. There are other things that occur that make the puppy different from the adult dog. Reproduction. Reproduction occurs in many different ways. But here's the thing. Living organisms copy their own DNA to bring about new entities. So here's what we're saying. If you look at a blue whale, it's very easy to understand, one blue whale, male, one blue whale, female, come together, blue whale baby. Very simple. But there are other ways in which living organisms can make copies of themselves by copying their DNA. For example, there's something called asexual reproduction. Think of asexual reproduction as the copying machine of living organisms. For example, if you take a starfish or a sea star and cut it, you will actually be able to grow an additional sea star just from that cut piece. If you look at Hydra, and these are like microscopic organisms, okay? They're single cell. They go through a process called budding, where literally you'll have like a small Hydra growing out the side of a larger one. That small Hydra will continue to grow and grow and grow until it's the same size as the parent Hydra it came from. And then with bacteria, a process called binary fission. Again, just think of it as a biologic copy machine. Now, not all things that make copies are alive. For example, bacteria make copies of viruses. The bacteria is alive, but the virus is not. And here's why. The way that a virus makes copies of itself is by taking its DNA and putting it into a bacteria. It would be like if I was going to the copy machine and my colleague said, hey, could you copy these for me? I'll put them in with my sheets and they didn't make the copies. I made the copies. Okay? Same thing. The viruses aren't making copies of themselves. The bacteria are making copies of the virus. So, with all this being said, I just wanted to point out, again, there are 7 criteria of all living things. All living things do all 7 of that criteria. If you don't do all 7, you're not a living thing. I hope this makes the abiotic and biotic discussion very clear for you guys. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.